The training field had finally gone dark. Hours of shouting, running, crawling through mud, and lifting gear heavier than reason itself had left the base wrapped in exhaustion. The wind pushed against the hangars with a low whistle, carrying the faint metallic scent of oil, sweat, and gunpowder. Inside the dimly lit mess hall, Sergeant Ava Reynolds sat alone at the far table, her posture straight even when no one was watching. A tray of lukewarm rations rested before her: mashed potatoes, 2 slices of bread, and a cup of black coffee that had gone cold 15 minutes ago. Her reflection in the metal tray showed dark circles under her eyes, evidence of another 14-hour day. At 28, Ava had earned a reputation that both inspired and unsettled the cadets. She wasn't the loudest voice on base, but her authority carried weight. Even the most arrogant recruits straightened their backs when she walked by. She was the first woman in her division to complete advanced ranger training with a perfect tactical score. Rumor said she once disarmed 3 assailants during a live-fire simulation without firing a shot. No one knew if it was true, but no one dared ask. Tonight, she wanted nothing more than silence. The mess hall lights buzzed softly, flickering like tired eyes. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her fork. The muscles in her shoulders ached. Training new cadets had its own kind of fatigue, mental, emotional, endless. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of detergent and metal trays, letting her mind wander to the letter folded inside her chest pocket. It was from her younger brother, stationed overseas. "Stay safe, sis. Don't be too hard on them." She almost smiled. Almost. The heavy door creaked open. 3 silhouettes stumbled in Cadet Morales, tall, sharp-jawed, always talking louder than he should. Trent, stocky and quiet, the kind who followed trouble rather than caused it. And Harlow Jr., the captain's son, carrying a chip on his shoulder the size of the base itself. Their fatigues were dirty, their faces drawn tight from hunger and frustration. They looked like boys pretending to be soldiers, and they knew it. Ava didn't turn around. She knew the sound of their boots, the hesitant scuff of men unsure if they should be there. Morales whispered, "Told you she'd still be here." Trent muttered, "We shouldn't." "Shut up," Morales snapped. They moved closer, the echo of their steps blending with the distant hum of the refrigerator units. Ava's voice broke the silence before they reached her. "The mess hall closed an hour ago, cadets." Her tone was even, measured, not a warning. "Not yet." Morales forced a smirk. "We figured rules bend for people who actually work hard, Sergeant." She looked up then, eyes like ice under fluorescent light. "You think hard work means breaking regulations?" He shrugged, pulling out a chair and sitting opposite her without permission. "I think hard work should at least get you a meal." Trent lingered near the doorway, glancing nervously toward the exit. Harlow Jr. joined Morales, crossing his arms with a defiant tilt of his chin. Ava sighed quietly and pushed her tray a few inches away. "You had your rations after drills." "Not enough," Morales said. "We were stuck hauling supplies for your unit." "We missed dinner." "That's unfortunate," she replied, sipping her coffee. "But you still don't enter restricted spaces without clearance." Morales leaned forward. "You're always preaching discipline, Sergeant. But tell me, does discipline fill your stomach?" She met his gaze without blinking. "Discipline keeps you alive." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The wind rattled the windows. Somewhere outside, a flagpole clanged faintly. Then Morales's smirk twisted into something darker. "Maybe you should share then." Trent's head jerked toward him. "Morales, don't." But Morales had already made up his mind. Anger, exhaustion, and humiliation from weeks of failed evaluations burned through him like alcohol in an open wound. He reached to his belt and unlatched the holster that still held his training. Sidearm, a simulated pistol used during exercises, modified but still capable of serious harm at close range. The metallic click echoed through the hall. Ava didn't move. Her pulse steadied, her breathing slowed. Her mind began to catalog everything distanced to the weapon. Morales's stance, the reflection of his arm in the steel counter behind him, the fear in the other cadet's eyes. "Put it away, cadet," she said softly. Morales's voice cracked. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want the food." "Then ask," she replied. He hesitated. Asking would make it weakness. Harlow Jr. tried to laugh, voice trembling. "Come on, Morales, you're losing it." But Morales ignored him. The hunger wasn't just in his stomach, it was in his pride. He'd failed the last marksmanship test, while Ava had praised another team in front of everyone. His father's voice echoed in his head. "You'll never make it if you can't lead." Now he wanted to prove something to himself, to her, to anyone who would remember. Ava studied his eyes. They weren't cruel, just desperate. That made him dangerous. She slowly placed her hands flat on the table. "You have 3 seconds to think carefully about what you're doing." Morales tightened his grip. "You think you can order me around forever?" 3. Trent took a step forward. "Morales, stop, this is stupid." 2. The air thickened. The hum of the lights sounded like a scream in the silence. Morales's breath came in shallow bursts. Sweat rolled down his temple. Ava's tone dropped lower. 1. He blinked just once, and in that heartbeat she moved. Her right hand snapped the tray upward, food and utensils exploding into the air. Morales flinched instinctively, eyes closing against the sudden assault of metal and mashed potatoes. Ava was already on her feet, chair screeching backward. She caught his wrist, twisted hard, and slammed his arm against the table's edge. The pistol clattered across the floor, spinning into the far corner. Morales grunted in pain as she pivoted, driving her shoulder into his chest and sending him crashing to the ground. Trent froze, halfway between helping and running. Harlow Jr. raised his hands. "Sergeant, stay where you are." She barked, voice commanding, every syllable sharpened by authority. The room went still. Morales groaned, clutching his wrist. Ava knelt beside him, her tone calm again. "You done?" He didn't answer. Shame flushed his face. She retrieved the pistol, ejected the magazine with one smooth motion, and placed both pieces on the table. "Eat," she said quietly. "If food was all you wanted, take it." The other 2 cadets stared at her, bewildered. This wasn't the reaction they expected. Ava turned away, grabbed a fresh tray from the counter, and filled it with what was left of the night's rations, bread, beans, fruit cup. She set it in front of Morales, who sat on the floor, humiliated and silent. "I'm not your enemy," she said. "But if you point a weapon at someone again, anyone, he'd better be ready for what comes next." Her voice wasn't angry. It carried disappointment, which somehow cut deeper. Morales's jaw trembled. He nodded once. Trent helped him up. Harlow avoided Ava's eyes, guilt heavy in his throat. "Now clean this place," she ordered softly. "And report to my unit at 0600. No excuses." They obeyed instantly, not from fear, but because she'd given them something they didn't expect, mercy. Ava sat back down, picked up her cold coffee, and stared out the window at the moonlit training fields. She heard the clatter of trays being stacked, the quiet apologies muttered under their breath. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the flag again. She whispered to herself, "Discipline keeps you alive." And somewhere deep inside, she hoped they'd remember. The air in the mess hall was heavy with tension, and the faint smell of spilt beans. The overhead lights hummed softly, throwing thin shadows across the steel tables. The echoes of what had just happened still hung like ghosts in the corners. Sergeant Ava Reynolds stood by the counter, silent, eyes fixed on the three cadets, now cleaning up the chaos they had caused. Her hands were steady, but her heart was a slow, steady drumbeat in her chest. She'd disarmed a man before, real threats, real combat, but this felt different. This wasn't a war zone. This was her own base. And the enemy wasn't an insurgent. It was her own. She could see Morales scrubbing the floor, his knuckles raw, face blank, but burning with humiliation. Trent mopped up food from the far corner, and Harlow Jr., the captain's son, wiped the tables without saying a word. The silence between them was thick, heavier than any punishment. Ava leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and said quietly, "You ever point a weapon at someone again, Morales, and you'll wish I'd turned you in tonight." Morales froze mid-scrub. He didn't look up. "Yes, Sergeant." She walked closer, boots echoing against the tile. "Do you understand why I didn't report you?" He swallowed hard. "Because you don't care?" Ava stared at him. "Because I do." That made him stop. She crouched beside him, voice low but sharp as glass. "You're angry, tired, and you think the world owes you something for surviving the day. But in this uniform, you don't get to act out hunger with a gun. You get to earn your respect, not steal it." Morales's eyes glistened with a quiet rage that wasn't directed at her anymore, but at himself. "I know," he muttered. "Do you?" she asked. "Because the next time you hesitate, the next time your temper thinks before your training, someone dies." There was no sound for a long moment, only the steady swish of Trent's mop. Finally, Ava straightened, her voice turning firm again. "You three report to my unit at 0600 sharp. No excuses, no delays. We're starting over." They nodded, though their faces looked like they'd swallowed gravel. When the clock on the wall struck midnight, Ava picked up her coffee again, still untouched and cold. She walked toward the exit, pausing for just a second to look back at them. "You can finish eating what's left," she said softly. "You'll need it." Then she left the mess hall, boots echoing in perfect rhythm, her shadow disappearing down the long, sterile hallway. Outside, the base was asleep. Floodlights glowed across the training fields, illuminating the outlines of helicopters and Humvees parked in neat rows. The night air was sharp and smelled faintly of jet fuel. Ava walked toward the barracks, her mind heavy with the weight of what just occurred. She could already imagine the report if she'd filed it. Cadet Morales brandished a weapon at superior officer. Detained and discharged. That would have been the easy way. But easy wasn't her method. She thought of her first commanding officer, Major Dempsey, who once told her, "A good soldier kills enemies. A great soldier prevents them." She'd never forgotten that. Inside the mess hall, Morales sat back against the wall, breathing hard. His wrist throbbed from where Ava had twisted it. The weapon, now safely disassembled, sat on the table like a reminder of how close he'd come to ruining his life. Trent sat across from him, silent for a while, and finally said, "What the hell were you thinking?" Morales didn't answer. He stared at the floor, shame creeping up his neck. "You pointed a gun at a superior," Harlow muttered. "Do you realize what that means?" Morales's jaw tightened. "I wasn't going to shoot." "Doesn't matter," Trent said. "You might as well have." Harlow snorted. "You're lucky she didn't shoot you." "If that were my father." Morales slammed his hand against the table. "Don't." His voice cracked, low and dangerous. "Don't talk about your father." Harlow went quiet, eyes hard. There it was, the truth none of them said aloud. The resentment, the hierarchy, the whispers that Ava Reynolds, for all her discipline and achievements, didn't belong. That she got lucky. That she was the captain's favorite until she outshined even his son. Morales rubbed his face with both hands. "I didn't come here to start a war." Trent looked at him quietly. Then why'd you bring a gun? Morales's voice broke. Because I was tired of being nobody. The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Harlow looked away, shame crawling up his spine. Morales wasn't wrong. They were all nobodies here, until someone like Ava came along and showed them how small they still were. Trent sighed and leaned forward. Then earn your place. Don't destroy it. Morales didn't reply. He picked up a piece of bread from the tray. Ava had left and chewed slowly, each bite tasting more like regret than food. By dawn, Ava was already on the training grounds. The fog rolled over the hills like smoke, and the air bit through her gloves. She stood with a clipboard in hand as the first cadets assembled in formation. Her posture was immaculate, her expression unreadable. At exactly 0600, Morales, Trent, and Harlow jogged toward her, breathless, eyes red from sleeplessness. They lined up in front of her, boots snapping together, trying to look composed. "Cadets," she said without looking up from her clipboard, "you are 15 seconds late." Harlow opened his mouth to speak, but Ava raised a hand. "You'll make up for it." "Ma'am," Morales began, but she cut him off. "Do you have something to say, cadet?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Sergeant." "Good," Ava replied. "Then we'll start with 5 miles. Full gear. You finish under 45 minutes, or you repeat it. Understood?" "Yes, Sergeant." They chorused, though their voices cracked under the weight of fatigue. Ava didn't flinch. "Move out." The trio took off down the field, boots slamming into the gravel track. Ava followed behind, watching every stumble, every gasp. Her tone never softened. She wasn't punishing them. She was rebuilding them. By mile 2, Morales's legs burned. Sweat drenched his shirt, and his vision blurred. But he kept going. Every time his mind whispered quit, he heard Ava's voice. Discipline keeps you alive. At mile 4, Trent tripped, face planting into the dirt. Harlow slowed to help, but Ava barked. "He gets up on his own." Trent groaned, pushed himself up, and kept running. Ava's voice was calm, almost detached. "Pain is your reminder that you're still alive. Learn to control it, not fear it." By the end of the 5th mile, the 3 collapsed to the ground, lungs screaming for air. Ava knelt beside Morales, who lay flat on his back, staring at the sky. "Not bad," she said quietly. "You kept your head this time." He looked at her, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're not going to turn us in?" She shook her head. "You already punished yourselves better than I ever could." There was silence, the kind that only comes after realization. Ava stood and looked toward the horizon, where the first rays of light stretched across the base. "You'll run 5 more tomorrow, and the day after, until you don't need orders to do what's right." Morales nodded slowly. "Yes, Sergeant." For the first time, his voice didn't sound angry. It sounded steady. Ava turned away and walked toward the armory, her boots leaving perfect prints in the dust. Behind her, the 3 cadets sat in silence, watching her go, none of them realizing yet that the moment they'd hated her most had become the one that would define them forever. The incident would remain unspoken, buried beneath drills and orders and sweat. But the memory of that gun, and what didn't happen, would echo louder than any punishment could. Because sometimes the greatest power a soldier can show is restraint. The sun at Fort Bragg rose harsh and golden, burning the mist off the field like fire through smoke. Sergeant Ava Reynolds stood at the range with her clipboard tucked beneath one arm, eyes fixed on her trainees as they fired downrange. The echo of rifles filled the air. Short, controlled bursts, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The previous night replayed in her head like a film she couldn't turn off. Morales's trembling hand, the click of the pistol, her own calm voice cutting through the chaos. She had diffused the situation, contained it, but she knew the base had ears. Secrets didn't last long in a place built on discipline and whispers. She sipped her coffee, letting the bitterness bite her tongue. Behind her, a voice broke through the gunfire. Sergeant Reynolds. She turned to see Lieutenant Grady, her direct superior, a square-jawed man with a clipboard of his own and the permanent look of someone who didn't believe in good news. "Lieutenant," Ava greeted. He stopped a few feet from her, scanning the line of cadets. "Captain Harlow's looking for you." Ava kept her expression neutral. Now, Grady confirmed, tone flat. He didn't sound pleased. She nodded once, handed her clipboard to a junior instructor, and walked off the range. She didn't hurry. Soldiers who rushed to an order looked guilty. Still, the tension in her stomach wound tighter with every step toward headquarters. Inside the captain's office, the air felt colder. The blinds were half closed, stripes of sunlight cutting across the room like bars. Behind the desk sat Captain Richard Harlow, broad-shouldered, graying at the temples, and known for his rigid sense of justice. He was also the father of one of the cadets from last night. "Sergeant Reynolds," he said, not looking up from his paperwork. "Sir?" Ava replied, standing at attention. He finally lifted his eyes. "At ease. Sit." She did, posture still perfect. Harlow leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "I received a report this morning. Unofficial, of course. It mentioned an altercation in the mess hall after hours." Ava's pulse slowed, but her voice stayed even. "Yes, sir." His brows rose slightly. "You admit there was one?" "I don't hide from what happens under my watch, sir." Harlow's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Then explain. In your own words." She took a breath, steady but controlled. 3 cadets entered the mess hall after hours. One of them, Morales, brandished his training pistol. I disarmed and detained him. No injuries, no rounds fired. I chose to handle it internally. "Internally," Harlow repeated, his tone neutral but heavy. "You mean without a report?" "Yes, sir." He set his pen down, eyes narrowing. "Do you realize how serious that is? A firearm pointed at a superior officer. That's grounds for immediate court-martial." Ava met his gaze. "I do, sir. But I also understand the difference between a mistake and a threat." For a long moment, Harlow said nothing. The silence between them felt like a test, the kind meant to expose cracks. Ava didn't look away. Finally, he leaned forward. "And if Morales does it again? If someone else sees your mercy as weakness?" "I'll deal with that, too," she said simply. Harlow studied her. "You believe you can reform him?" "I believe he can reform himself, if given the chance," she replied. "I'm not interested in breaking soldiers, sir. I'm interested in building them." That landed. The captain looked at her for several seconds, then exhaled through his nose. "You're a good soldier, Reynolds. Maybe too good for your own good." She didn't reply. He stood, walking toward the window, staring out at the training fields. "You know my son's name came up in that report." "Yes, sir." He turned his head slightly. "And you didn't mention it?" "No, sir." "Why?" "Because he didn't point the gun," Ava said. "He followed the wrong man, but he didn't cross the line." Harlow nodded once, slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say." There was something almost like relief in his voice. Then he straightened, the commander returning to the surface. "Very well, Sergeant. I'll consider this matter closed, on one condition." She waited. "You continue training those cadets personally. If I see progress, it stays buried. If I don't?" His eyes hardened. "Then you'll wish you'd filled out the paperwork." "Yes, sir." Dismissed. Ava stood, saluted, and turned to leave. Her heart was calm, but deep down she knew this was only the beginning. That afternoon, Morales and his unit returned to the range. Their faces were pale, movements stiff with shame. They lined up silently, avoiding Ava's eyes. "Cadet Morales," she said. He snapped to attention. "Yes, Sergeant." "You're leading today's drill." His eyes widened. "Me, Sergeant?" "You heard me." He hesitated, looking at the ground. "Yes, Sergeant." She handed him a set of range orders. "You'll coordinate timing, accuracy, and safety checks. Your squad will follow your lead. If they fail, you fail." Morales took the paper, his fingers trembling slightly. This wasn't punishment, it was exposure. The kind that could crush a man or forge him. As the drill began, Ava stood at the back, silent, observing. Morales barked commands, shaky at first, then firmer. His voice carried over the noise of the rifles. When a cadet misfired, he corrected them without yelling. When one fell behind, he adjusted formation. Halfway through, his voice steadied. "Focus on the trigger, not the noise. The bullet follows your calm, not your panic." Ava's lips curved, just barely. He was repeating her words. When the final target fell, she called, "Cease fire." The range went silent. Smoke curled up from hot barrels, drifting like fog. Ava walked down the line, inspecting each rifle. She stopped in front of Morales. "Results?" He glanced at the board. 78% hit rate, Sergeant." "Below standard," she said. "Yes, Sergeant. But your command presence was strong. Better than yesterday." His jaw tightened, but there was something new in his eyes. Focus. "Keep that up," she said quietly. "And one day you'll understand why I didn't report you." He nodded. "Yes, Sergeant." She turned away, the corners of her mouth lifting ever so slightly. That night, the mess hall was quieter. The same 3 cadets sat together, eating in silence. The tension that once crackled between them had faded into something else, a quiet respect they couldn't name yet. Trent finally broke the silence. "She's not what I expected." Harlow smirked faintly. "You expected her to yell?" "I expected her to hate us," Trent said. Morales set down his fork. "She doesn't hate us. She just refuses to give up on us." They ate the rest of their meal without words. But when Ava passed by later, none of them spoke. They just stood automatically, as if their bodies had learned respect before their minds did. Back in her quarters, Ava opened the letter from her brother again. "Don't be too hard on them," it said. "Most people just need one person to believe they can be better." She folded the letter carefully and set it on her desk beside her nameplate. Then she looked out the window toward the barracks, where lights flickered off one by one. Somewhere out there, 3 cadets were learning that strength wasn't about pulling a trigger. It was about holding yourself together when everything in you wanted to snap. And as the base went silent under the Carolina night, Ava whispered to herself, 3 seconds can change a soldier. Sometimes it can save one. The morning started with the stillness that only military bases know, the kind that hums before the day's first whistle. Sergeant Ava Reynolds stood beside the command tent, scanning the training field. Rows of cadets marched under a steel-gray sky, their boots striking the dirt in perfect rhythm. The base had settled into order again, at least on the surface. But beneath that calm, Ava sensed something else. Tension. Unease. It hung in the air like humidity before a storm. She'd seen it before, the false quiet that came before soldiers broke. By noon, the air was heavy and hot. The squad was preparing for a live fire exercise, the first involving real ammunition. It was a milestone for every trainee, but also a test that separated composure from chaos. Ava walked along the firing line, inspecting weapons. "Safety on until my command," she ordered. Her voice carried across the range, even, controlled, but sharp enough to cut through chatter. Cadet Morales, once the reckless one, now stood tall beside her, helmet tight, rifle gripped correctly. His movements were deliberate. He'd learned something since that night. Beside him, Harlow and Trent adjusted their gear silently. The three had become inseparable, an unlikely brotherhood forged from guilt and second chances. "Today's exercise will test your focus," Ava said, eyes locked on Morales. "You'll advance under simulated combat conditions. Communication is your weapon. Panic is your enemy." "Yes, Sergeant," they chorused. She nodded once. "Begin." The whistle shrieked. Immediately, the field erupted, controlled chaos. Cadets sprinted forward, dropped to prone positions, fired in short bursts, then moved again. Dirt kicked up under their boots. The air vibrated with the echo of gunfire. Ava walked behind them, watchful but calm, her every sense tuned to rhythm and mistake. "Eyes up, Trent," she barked. "Adjust your sight, Harlow. Good pace, Morales. Keep it." Everything was running like clockwork until the explosion. A single thunderous boom split the air. The ground shook. Smoke rose from the far end of the field, the supply shed. "Cease fire!" Ava yelled, her voice cutting through the confusion. "Cease fire now." The range fell silent, except for the sound of flames crackling in the distance. Cadets looked around, confused, some terrified. Then came the shouting, "Fire! Fire at the ammo shed!" Ava's stomach turned cold. That shed contained live rounds, fuel, and grenades. If it blew, half the range would go with it. "Form up!" she shouted, sprinting toward the smoke. The cadets hesitated, frozen by fear. Morales was the first to move. "You heard her. Move!" That broke the spell. They ran. As Ava neared the shed, the heat hit her like a wall. Flames licked out from the doorway, black smoke billowing skyward. The acrid stench of burning oil filled her lungs. She grabbed the nearest cadet. "Get the hose line from the east truck." "Now," he bolted. Ava turned, spotting Morales struggling with a fallen beam near the door. Harlow and Trent rushed to help. Together, they shoved it aside, clearing a narrow path. Inside, she could hear the faint pop-pop-pop of smaller rounds detonating from the heat. "Everyone back!" She shouted. "No!" Morales yelled. "There's someone inside." Ava froze. "Who?" "I saw him go in 10 minutes ago. Staff Sergeant Cole." Her mind raced. Cole was the quartermaster, and the only one with keys to the secondary armory inside. Smoke rolled out in thick waves. She had seconds to decide. She looked at Morales, his face streaked with soot, fear, and something else. Conviction. "Mask up," she said, pulling a cloth from her vest. "You're with me." They pushed through the doorway, heat searing their faces. Visibility was almost zero. Everything was orange and black. Ava crouched low, sweeping her flashlight beam across the smoke. "Cole, sound off." Nothing. Just the roar of flames and the metallic hiss of heated ammunition. She pressed forward, boots crunching glass and debris. Her lungs burned even through the cloth. The shed groaned under the stress, beams bending, ready to collapse. Then she saw him. Cole lay near a workbench, half-conscious, leg pinned under a metal cabinet. "Got him!" Ava shouted. "Morales, lift on 3. 1, 2, 3. They heaved. The cabinet shifted and toppled aside. Ava dragged Cole upright, throwing his arm over her shoulder. "Go, go, go," she yelled. The doorway ahead flickered through the smoke. They stumbled toward it until the roof above cracked like thunder. A flaming plank dropped between them and the exit. Morales didn't think. He tackled it aside with his shoulder, shouting through gritted teeth. Flames singed his sleeve, but he pushed through, clearing the path. Ava hauled Cole through the doorway as Morales followed, both of them crashing onto the dirt outside. The moment they hit the ground, the shed exploded behind them, a deafening boom that sent a shockwave through the field. Debris rained down, hot and smoking. For a moment, there was silence. Then, coughing and covered in soot, Morales groaned, "3 seconds, Sergeant." I remembered. Ava stared at him, chest heaving, the memory of her lesson echoing in her mind. 3 seconds can change everything. She nodded. "You did good, Cadet." Later, medics rushed in, sirens wailing across the base. Cole was stabilized and taken to the infirmary. Morales's burns were minor, treated with gauze and salve. The base commander himself arrived, Colonel Hayes, a man known for breaking soldiers with words alone. He looked from the smoking ruins to Ava, then to the injured cadets. "Report, Sergeant." Ava stood straight, saluting through soot-streaked skin. "Fire in the ammo shed. 1 casualty, no fatalities. Cause unknown, possibly electrical. Contained before secondary detonation." Hayes narrowed his eyes. "And you entered the shed? Without protective gear?" "Yes, sir." "Against protocol?" "Yes, sir." He stepped closer. "Why?" "Because someone was inside," she said simply. The colonel stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, his lips curved slightly. "That someone's alive because of you." He turned his gaze to Morales. "And you followed her in?" "Yes, sir," Morales said, wincing as the medic wrapped his arm. "That was reckless," Hayes said. "But brave." Morales swallowed. "Sergeant Reynolds taught me the difference." Hayes gave a small nod, then looked back at Ava. "You train them well, Sergeant. Keep doing it." He walked off, leaving silence in his wake. That night, the base gathered in the mess hall. The air buzzed with quiet conversation, the kind that ripples after something close to disaster. When Ava entered, every cadet stood. Morales, arm bandaged, raised his cup. "To Sergeant Reynolds, who runs toward the fire when the rest of us freeze." A hush fell. Then, one by one, every cadet lifted their cups too. Ava stood still, unsure what to say. She wasn't used to moments like this, to gratitude. She finally raised her own cup slightly and said, "To those who learned when not to pull the trigger." Laughter broke the tension. The room relaxed again, chatter returning like a tide. But in the corner, Harlow leaned toward Morales and whispered, "You realize the entire base is going to hear about this by morning?" Morales smiled faintly. "Good. Maybe they'll finally know who Sergeant Reynolds really is." Later that night, Ava stood outside the barracks, watching the distant lights of emergency trucks fade. Her body ached, her throat burned, but her spirit was calm. She thought of her brother's letter again, the one that said most people just need one person to believe they can be better. Maybe tonight, she thought, someone believed in me too. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke and steel, reminders of what they survived. And as the stars blinked awake above the base, Ava whispered to herself, 3 seconds. That's all it takes to turn fear into courage. 2 days after the explosion, Fort Bragg no longer sounded the same. The usual morning drills, the barked orders, the laughter of cadets at breakfast, all of it had dulled under the heavy weight of investigation. Soldiers whispered instead of shouted. Everyone knew something wasn't right. And at the center of it all stood Sergeant Ava Reynolds, still smelling faintly of smoke despite the showers, her mind replaying every detail of that day. The fire had been ruled under review, but Ava knew that phrase too well. It meant someone in command didn't believe it was an accident. She walked through the remains of the supply shed, now a cordoned-off ruin of twisted steel and blackened concrete. The air still carried the tang of burnt oil. Investigators in hazmat suits combed through debris, marking pieces of melted metal and shattered crates. Ava crouched near what used to be the ammo rack. Her eyes caught something the others had missed, a small, charred cable leading away from the main power junction. It looked cut, not melted. She frowned, tracing it with her gloved fingers. No scorch pattern on the end. Clean slice. Before she could investigate further, a voice barked behind her. Sergeant Reynolds. She turned. Special Agent Walker, Military Sid, stood there, tall, built like granite, wearing the kind of expression that didn't bend even for rank. He flashed his badge. Step away from the debris, Sergeant. This is an active investigation. Ava straightened. Yes, sir. Just noticing something. Walker's gaze flicked to the cable, then back to her. Noticed it too, which means you're sharp. But that also means you understand chain of command and when to leave things alone. Yes, sir. He stared at her for a moment, as if testing whether she'd actually obey that order. Then he turned back to his team. Ava's jaw clenched. She'd been in the Army long enough to recognize when someone was trying to cover something. That evening, Ava found herself summoned again, this time to Colonel Hayes's office. He was pacing when she entered, hands behind his back, face carved from worry. Sergeant, sit down. She did. Hayes sighed. I'm going to level with you. Sid found something, traces of thermite residue near the electrical box. You know what that means. Sabotage. Her stomach tightened. Any suspects? Hayes hesitated. They're reviewing everyone who had access to the shed that week. That includes quartermasters, instructors, and cadets. Ava's eyes narrowed. Cadets? Sir, those kids wouldn't know how to handle thermite, let alone plant it. Maybe, Hayes said, but Seed thinks otherwise. One of your cadets, Morales, was seen near the shed earlier that day. The words hit her like a blow. Sir, Morales was prepping for leave fire drills. He wasn't anywhere near the shed. Security logs say otherwise, Hayes replied, his tone measured. I'm not saying I believe it. But you know how this works. Seed wants to make an example of someone. Ava leaned forward. Sir, he saved a man's life in that fire. That's not the action of a saboteur. Hayes looked at her, weary, conflicted. I agree, but evidence talks louder than character. And right now, it's talking too much. By the time Ava left the office, night had fallen. The base was quiet except for the low hum of generators. She walked past the barracks, her boots crunching gravel, and stopped at the cadets' quarters. Inside, Morales sat on his bunk, eyes downcast, arms crossed. Harlow and Trent stood nearby, tense. He looked up when she entered. They think I did it, he said flatly. Ava stayed silent for a moment. Do you know why they think that? He nodded. Because I borrowed the spare key to get extra targets that morning. The camera must have caught me. But I didn't touch anything else, Sergeant. I swear. Trent jumped in, voice sharp. He was with us after that. We were running drills, same as everyone. Harlow added quietly. They're trying to pin it on someone who can't fight back. Ava looked at Morales. His face was tired, older somehow. The kind of exhaustion that came from knowing your word might not save you. I believe you, she said finally. His head lifted. You do? Yeah, because the kind of man who runs into fire to save someone isn't the kind who starts it. She looked around at all three of them. But if we're going to clear your name, We can't rely on belief. We need proof. Trent frowned. You're saying we do our own investigation? Ava smirked faintly. Not officially. Over the next few nights, Ava moved quietly through the base. She reviewed maintenance logs, questioned mechanics, and examined old security feeds. She knew she was walking a fine line, technically disobeying SEED, but she didn't care. Morales's record wasn't going to be destroyed over a lie. Then, on the fourth night, she found it. A storage log. One that had been altered. Someone had signed out a crate of thermite rods under her own name, Sergeant Ava Reynolds. The date matched the day before the explosion. Her blood ran cold. She grabbed the document, flipping it over. The handwriting was wrong, slightly off in pressure and stroke, like someone imitating her. Whoever had done this wasn't just covering tracks, they were framing her too. The next morning, she confronted Colonel Hayes. Sir, with respect, you need to see this. She placed the log on his desk. Hayes frowned, examining it. That's your signature. It's not, Ava said firmly. Someone forged it. Look at the slant. Mine leans right, not left. And the pressure's inconsistent. Whoever wrote it was trying too hard to copy it. Hayes rubbed his jaw. You're accusing someone inside the base of sabotage and forgery, Sergeant. That's not a light claim. I'm not claiming, Ava said. I'm proving. The person who accessed the supply shed had to use my name to get past the keylog. Someone with administrative clearance. Hayes looked at her for a long moment, then exhaled. Walker won't like this. But if you're right, this is bigger than an accident. Bigger how? Try internal weapons testing. Illegal shipments. Things that should have been destroyed months ago. Ava's eyes darkened. You think someone was hiding that? Hayes nodded grimly. And they used the fire to cover it up. That night, the base fell into lockdown. Sid swept every storage facility, pulling manifests, checking inventory. Soldiers were confined to quarters while investigators combed records. Ava waited in silence, pacing her room. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. She opened it to find Morales, pale, breathless. Sergeant, someone broke into the range office. I saw them. They took something. Ava's instincts kicked in. What did they take? I don't know, but I think it was the security drive, the one that records training footage. She didn't hesitate. Show me. They ran through the darkened corridors, boots pounding. The range office door was splintered, lock broken. Inside, papers scattered across the floor. The server rack in the corner blinked, one light missing. Ava crouched beside it. The drive was gone. She looked up at Morales. Whoever set that fire isn't finished. They're erasing proof. Morales swallowed hard. What do we do? She stood, eyes burning with purpose. We stop waiting for orders. Outside, thunder rolled across the Carolina sky, lightning flashing in the distance. It wasn't just a storm. It was a warning. Ava knew this was no longer about discipline or redemption. It was about survival and truth. And she'd be damned if she let her cadets go down for someone else's lies. Rain hammered the roof of Fort Bragg's barracks like drumfire. Thunder rolled across the horizon, rattling the windows as if the sky itself were warning them to stay quiet. Inside the dimly lit briefing room, Sergeant Ava Reynolds stood over a table scattered with maps, logs, and printed screenshots of surveillance feeds. The clock read 2:37. None of them had slept. Across from her sat Morales, Trent, and Harlow, the same 3 cadets who once pointed a gun at her for food. Now, they looked to her as if she were the only thing standing between them and destruction. Here's what we know, Ava began, her voice steady. Someone planted thermite in the supply shed, forged my signature on the storage logs, and deleted footage from the range office. She tapped the map with a pen. They knew the camera schedule. They knew clearance codes. That means it's someone inside command. Trent frowned. So, not some random mechanic. No, Ava said. This was precise, coordinated. Morales leaned forward. Then what's the motive? Why burn a shed full of ammunition? Ava's eyes darkened. To hide something. The colonel hinted that outdated weapons were supposed to be destroyed months ago. If they weren't, someone's selling them. Harlow swore under his breath. You mean black market military gear? That's treason, Ava finished. And whoever's running it didn't want evidence left behind. Silence settled. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping like Morse code against the windows. Ava slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of access logs she'd pulled before Seed locked the systems. Look here, she said. 4 people used clearance Alpha 5 the day before the fire. Me, Quartermaster Cole, Captain Harlow, and one more. Morales squinted at the page. Lieutenant Grady. Ava nodded slowly. Exactly. Harlow's eyes widened. Grady? But he's your superior, which makes it easier for him to override reports, Ava said. He's had control of logistics for months. Every crate that enters or leaves this base goes through his approval. Trent rubbed his jaw. If he's dirty, we can't take this to command. Sid would warn him before we got a word in. Ava looked around the room. Then we go quiet. Gather proof. We do it the way soldiers should, smart, silent, and by the book, he broke. Morales cracked a small grin. So we're going rogue. Officially. Ava almost smiled back. Something like that. For the next 2 days, they worked in shadows. Ava used her clearance to access maintenance tunnels that connected the armory to the transport depot. Morales hacked into leftover surveillance caches on auxiliary drive skills he'd never listed on his training file. By the 3rd night, they had something. Morales set a small laptop on the table, screen flickering in the dark. Pulled this from a backup drive under the communications bay. It's grainy, but look. The footage showed the night before the fire. A tall man in uniform entered the shed. His face was partially hidden, but his walk straight-backed, stiff, was unmistakable. Lieutenant Grady, Ava said. He placed a crate on the floor, pried it open, and pulled out metallic rods thermite. Then he set a timer device on the junction box and walked out. The time stamp matched the ignition time almost exactly. Trent whispered, "That's it. That's the proof." Ava shook her head. Not enough. This video's off a backup camera with no sound, no metadata. Sid will call it doctored. So what do we do? Morales asked. We find the original, she said. It'll be stored in Grady's quarters or his office. Harlow exhaled. Breaking into a superior officer's quarters. That's career suicide. Ava looked at him. If we don't, Morales goes to prison. Maybe me, too. Choose your risk. He swallowed hard. Then we do it. They moved after midnight. The storm gave them cover, wind masking their steps across the wet pavement. The base lights flickered as lightning struck somewhere nearby. Grady's office was in the administration block secured, but not impenetrable. Ava had memorized the rotation schedule of the night guards from her years of training oversight. 30 seconds between patrols, she whispered. Morales bypassed the keypad. He knelt, prying open the security panel with a screwdriver. Sparks flickered. Got it. 10 seconds. Ava counted the seconds in her head steady, calm, like her heartbeat on the battlefield. 1, 2, 3. The lock clicked. They slipped inside. The office was neat, almost obsessively so. Papers stacked perfectly, pens aligned. It was the kind of order that hid chaos beneath. Ava moved to the desk, searching through drawers. Trent checked the cabinet. Harlow watched the hall. Then Morales froze. "Sergeant, you need to see this." He held up a ledger, handwritten, filled with shipment records. Several entries had red stamps marked disposed. But beside them, faint pencil notes read, "Delivered Dock 7B." Dock 7B wasn't a disposal site. It was an off-book loading area near the edge of the base. Ava's pulse quickened. He's moving the weapons off-site. Morales flipped another page. "And look at the dates, another transfer tomorrow night." Trent muttered, "We could catch him in the act." Before Ava could reply, the hallway light flickered. Footsteps echoed outside. "Hide," she hissed. They ducked behind the storage unit as the door creaked open. Grady stepped in, shaking rain from his jacket, muttering into his radio. "Shipments on schedule. No, CID's still chasing ghosts. Reynolds is distracted with her cadets. We're clear." Ava's jaw clenched. Her hand hovered near her sidearm, but she forced herself still. 3 seconds, she reminded herself. Think, don't react. Grady walked to his desk, flipped the ledger open, and scribbled something down. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small black drive. "The original footage," Morales whispered. Ava's eyes narrowed. "We get that drive. We end this." But then Grady froze mid-sentence, frowning. He turned toward the door, then toward the shadows. "Who's there?" The tension snapped. Ava lunged first, grabbing his wrist before he could draw his sidearm. The room exploded into chaos. Chairs overturned. The ledger crashed to the floor. Trent tackled Grady's arm. Morales grabbed for the drive. Grady roared, slamming his elbow into Ava's ribs. Pain shot through her side, but she held on. "Morales, go!" she shouted. He bolted out the door, the flash drive clutched in his hand. Grady swung at Ava again, but this time she ducked, twisting his arm behind him. "You lit that fire," she hissed. He laughed through gritted teeth. "You don't understand what you're in, Sergeant. You think this ends with me?" Ava slammed him against the desk. "It ends tonight." Before she could cuff him, the sound of boots thundered down the hall. Guards. Grady smirked. "And now, you'll look like the traitor." The door burst open. SID officers flooded in, weapons raised. Ava froze, breath heaving, Grady pinned beneath her. "Step away from him," one shouted. Ava's eyes met Grady's. His smirk told her everything. He'd called them before she even entered the office. She released him slowly, hands up. "He's dirty. Check his desk, there's—" But Grady cut her off, voice trembling with fake outrage. "She attacked me. She broke into my office. She's trying to destroy evidence." The agents surrounded her, one snapping handcuffs onto her wrists. Morales's voice echoed from the corridor. "Sergeant." Ava turned just enough to shout, "Run, Morales! Get that drive to the colonel." Then one of the agents shoved her forward. "That's enough. You're done." As they dragged her down the hall, she looked back one last time. Grady stood in the doorway, rubbing his arm, smiling just slightly. But his smile faltered when he realized something. The ledger was gone. Morales had taken both the drive and the book. Hours later, Ava sat in the holding cell. Her ribs ached, her wrists were raw from cuffs. Outside, thunder rolled again, echoing through the metal corridors. Despite everything, a faint, almost defiant smile tugged at her lips. Because somewhere out there, one of her cadets, the same one who once pointed a gun at her, was now risking everything to clear her name. And that, she thought, was the kind of soldier she'd always hoped to build. The storm had not relented. Rain poured in sheets across Fort Bragg, hammering the ground like a drum roll a warning. Lightning flashed, illuminating the barracks and training fields in brief, harsh bursts. Somewhere, thunder rolled, a distant echo of the chaos that had already begun. Cadet morals ran. Each step splashed through puddles, boots skidding on the slick concrete. In his backpack, the black drive and ledger weighed more than they physically could, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavier. One slip, one misstep, and everything they had uncovered would vanish. Behind him, alarms wailed across the base. The once silent corridors were now filled with the sound of boots pounding, radios crackling, and distant shouts. Lieutenant Grady had realized the ledger and drive were gone, and now the entire base would hunt them. Morales ducked into an alley behind the supply depot, pressing his back against the wet metal siding. He glanced at the drive in his hands, then at the stormy sky. 3 seconds. Think. He activated his phone, sending an encrypted message to Ava's wrist radio. Drive secure. Going to Colonel. We'll need extraction. There was no response immediately. The cell signal was spotty under the steel roof. Morales pressed forward, darting across the open training field. Floodlights swung overhead, and he flattened himself as a search patrol passed. The base had become a labyrinth of steel, concrete, and rain, each corner a potential trap. Morales's lungs burned with exertion, but he didn't slow. Not for a second. Not until he reached the edge of the administrative building. Inside the command center, Colonel Hayes stared at the monitors. Security footage from multiple angles had been pulled in real time. He saw shadows moving, rapid, deliberate, the same ones that had broken into Grady's office. Who is that? He barked at the nearest officer. It's Morales, sir, Cadet. Hayes clenched his jaw. And he has the ledger? Yes, sir. And the black drive. Hayes exhaled, a mixture of fury and relief. Get a team ready. Extraction. Now. Meanwhile, Morales darted into the maintenance tunnels, slick with water and mold. He pressed his fingers to the drive, memorizing its contents. Grady's shipment logs, the thermite plan's forged signatures. Proof enough to send the lieutenant straight to military prison. But the tunnels were a maze. Every junction, every shadow threatened capture. He thought of Ava, trapped in the holding cell, her reputation hanging in the balance. He owed her this run. 3 seconds to think, 1 moment to act. A shout echoed from behind. Stop! Cadet Morales. He darted left, ducking into a side passage. Guards' boots splashed behind him. Rainwater dripped from the ceiling, pooling at his boots. He stumbled, almost lost the drive, but kept moving. Each breath came ragged, each heartbeat a warning. Above ground, Grady was mobilizing a small strike team. His face was pale, eyes wild, but his movements precise. He'd already confirmed the stolen items, and he knew the consequences if they reached Colonel Hayes. You find him, Grady barked, and no one gets hurt, but the evidence comes back. Alive, or it doesn't matter. The irony wasn't lost on him. Morales's survival was irrelevant to Grady. Only the ledger and drive mattered. Morales emerged from a manhole near the outer perimeter. His uniform was soaked, his hands trembling, but he didn't stop. Floodlights scanned the area. He rolled into the shadows, keeping low, using every inch of cover. Ahead, he could see the colonel's motor pool. The extraction team, SEAD officers, and Hayes's trusted guards waited. This was the last stretch. One slip now, and everything failed. He sprinted. Bullets cracked behind him, striking concrete, splintering debris. A guard yelled. Morales twisted, throwing himself over a low wall as lightning illuminated the scene. 3 seconds. Calculate, don't panic. He noticed a gap between two trucks, enough to slip through undetected. He dove, rolling across the wet asphalt, the drive clutched to his chest. Inside the motor pool, Colonel Hayes saw the approach. "There!" he shouted, pointing at Morales. "Go!" 2 guards bolted, clearing the path. Morales didn't hesitate. He ran straight into the open space, sprinting toward the armored SUV. Grady's team emerged from the shadows, guns raised, yelling orders. But Hayes's men blocked them just in time. Morales slammed the SUV door shut behind him, the drive safe. He exhaled heavily, chest rising and falling. Rain streamed down his face, mixing with sweat and grime. Hayes climbed into the vehicle, turning to Morales. "You got it?" "Yes, sir. Every record, every forged signature. It's all here." Hayes's face hardened. "Good. You did well. Not just as a cadet, as a soldier." Morales finally allowed himself a small, exhausted grin. The SUV roared into motion, tires splashing through puddles, weaving past the storm-drenched grounds. Back at the command center, Grady's face twisted in fury. He banged his fist against the desk. "No, that's impossible. They were supposed to be cornered." One of his officers hesitated. "Sir, maybe we underestimated her." Grady's eyes narrowed. "No, Reynolds always knows 3 seconds ahead. That's her advantage." Hours later, the storm broke. Morales, Hayes, and the SID team reviewed the contents of the drive in the colonel's office. The evidence was undeniable. Grady had orchestrated multiple illegal weapons shipments, forged signatures, and planned the fire to cover his tracks. Colonel Hayes's eyes were cold. "We act immediately. Grady is detained. He gets no chance to destroy evidence or warn anyone. He's facing a court-martial. And Reynolds, she gets her name cleared." Morales smiled faintly, exhausted. "Sergeant Reynolds. She's going to be proud." Hayes nodded. "She already is." The next morning, Ava was released from the holding cell. Her expression was calm, but inside, she was a storm of relief and fury. Morales met her as she stepped into the corridor. "You did it," she said quietly. "We did it," Morales corrected. "You trained us well. Told us what 3 seconds could do." Ava allowed herself a small smile. "And you remembered." They walked together toward the colonel's office. Grady was already in custody, silent, handcuffed, flanked by Sid. His smirk had disappeared, replaced by something closer to fear. The investigation concluded swiftly. Grady's illegal operations were exposed. Charges ranged from sabotage to conspiracy, and the trial would be swift and public. Ava's reputation was restored, not just cleared, but elevated. Cadets across the base whispered about her bravery and leadership. Morales, Trent, and Harlow had proven themselves in a crucible of fire, literal and metaphorical, and had earned the kind of respect that could only come from survival and courage. That night, in the quiet of the barracks, Morales, Harlow, and Trent gathered once more. They sat in silence, reflecting on everything: the fire, the betrayal, the hunt, and the victory. Finally, Morales spoke. "You know, Sergeant Reynolds once told me something. That 3 seconds can change a soldier. I think I finally understand." Harlow chuckled softly. "Yeah. And that soldier can save a lot more than just themselves." Trent raised a cup of water. "To Sergeant Reynolds, the one who never stopped believing in us." Morales lifted his own. "To 3 seconds." They drank, and for the first time in weeks, the storm inside the base had finally passed. Outside, lightning flickered on the horizon, illuminating a base that had survived chaos, betrayal, and fire, stronger than before. The morning air was crisp, the Carolina sun breaking through scattered clouds over Fort Bragg. It was calm now, deceptively peaceful, as though the base itself were taking a deep breath after weeks of chaos. Inside the colonel's office, Sergeant Ava Reynolds stood at attention as Colonel Hayes prepared the final report. The room smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and the lingering tension of months of conflict. "Sergeant," Hayes said, not looking up, "this report will go straight to the commanding general. Lieutenant Grady is under custody. Charges are severe: sabotage, forgery, endangering cadets, and multiple counts of conspiracy." Ava's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Sir?" Hayes finally looked at her, eyes serious but not unkind. "Your actions during this investigation were exemplary. You followed the chain of command, protected your cadets, and ensured justice. The base owes you more than it knows." Ava's expression stayed neutral, but inside, a weight she hadn't realized she carried began to lift. Word traveled fast. By noon, cadets lined the training fields, boots on the dirt, eyes sharp and disciplined, waiting for Ava's arrival. Rumors of her bravery had already spread. The woman who had run toward the fire, who had trained a rebellious trio into capable soldiers, who had outsmarted a corrupt officer. Morales, Trent, and Harlow waited near the front. Their faces were streaked with dirt from drills and sweat, but their eyes were steady, filled with respect and gratitude. Ava approached, walking through the line of cadets who snapped to attention at her presence. Every head turned, every whisper ceased. Even those who had once doubted her now watched silently, understanding that they were in the presence of someone extraordinary. She stopped in front of her 3 cadets. Morales stepped forward, saluting sharply. "Sergeant Reynolds, we owe you everything." Ava's lips curved faintly. "You earned it. Not me. Don't forget that." Trent added, "You showed us how to be soldiers. How to survive when everything's against you." Harlow nodded. "And how to fight for what's right." Colonel Hayes stepped onto the field, flanked by senior officers. "Cadets," he called. "Today we recognize actions above and beyond the call of duty." Sergeant Ava Reynolds acted with courage, integrity, and unwavering leadership. Lieutenant Grady's crimes have been exposed, thanks to her guidance and the bravery of these cadets. He gestured toward Ava. "Sergeant Reynolds, report." She stepped forward, chest out, chin high. "Sir, reporting as ordered." Hayes continued, voice booming across the field. "Effective immediately, Sergeant Reynolds is awarded the Army Commendation Medal for heroism. Her leadership preserved lives, exposed corruption, and reinforced the values of this base. Cadets, remember her example. Discipline, courage, and integrity are what make a soldier great." The medal was pinned to her uniform, gleaming against her chest. Applause erupted, clattering against the walls of the training field. Ava allowed herself a small smile, but her eyes sought out her cadets. Morales caught her gaze and nodded slightly. 3 seconds, he seemed to say, remembering her lesson that had saved lives and careers alike. Ava's thoughts drifted briefly to the night of the fire, the explosion, the storm, the fear, and how those 3 cadets had followed her into danger. They were no longer the reckless youths who had once pointed a gun at her for food. They were soldiers now, forged in fire and discipline. Later, in the quiet of the barracks, Ava debriefed her cadets. Morales, Trent, and Harlow sat with notebooks in hand, eager to learn, eager to grow. "You understand the rules of engagement," Ava said, voice firm but kind. "But courage isn't just about following orders. It's about knowing when to act, even if no one else believes you can." Morales raised his hand. "Sergeant, will we see more threats like this?" Ava considered it. "Life's full of threats. Not all of them are obvious. But remember this, 3 seconds can change a soldier. You control what you do in those moments." That's how you survive. That's how you lead. Trent scribbled furiously. 3 seconds. He muttered. To think, to act, to survive. Harlow looked up, eyes bright. And to save others. Ava nodded. Exactly. Now, get some rest. Tomorrow, training continues, stronger, smarter, and safer. Days later, Grady faced court-martial. Evidence from Morales's drive and ledger left him no defense. His smirk had vanished, replaced by fear and disbelief. He received a sentence of dishonorable discharge and imprisonment, a warning to anyone who thought corruption could flourish. Unchecked in the army, the base exhaled. Life slowly returned to routine, drills resumed, and cadets returned to their studies with renewed focus. Yet the memory of the fire, the betrayal, and the lessons learned lingered in their minds. Ava walked through the mess hall, quietly observing the cadets. Some still glanced at her with awe, others with subtle smiles of camaraderie. For the first time, she allowed herself to enjoy the quiet respect she had earned, not through intimidation, but through action, wisdom, and integrity. She sat briefly at a table with Morales, Trent, and Harlow. You've come far, she said. Morales grinned, a little sheepishly. Couldn't have done it without you, Sergeant. Ava shook her head. You could. I just reminded you that 3 seconds matter. You remembered. Trent smirked. We'll never forget it. Harlow added, neither will anyone else on this base. Weeks later, the training fields were alive with new cadets, drills echoing across the morning air. Ava watched from the sidelines, clipboard in hand, observing, guiding, correcting. Morales, now a trusted team leader, moved through formations with precision and calm. She caught his eye and nodded slightly. His subtle smile said more than words, gratitude, respect, and a promise to uphold the lessons she had taught. Ava exhaled, feeling a rare sense of peace. The storm had passed. Chaos had tested them all, but they had survived, stronger and wiser. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the base, and the army, had been changed forever by what they had endured. That evening, Ava stood alone on a hill overlooking the base. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The barracks, the training fields, the motor pool, all were quiet now, bathed in the last light of day. She thought of the fire, the explosion, the betrayal, and the chase. She thought of Morales, Trent, Harlow, and all the cadets who had watched, learned, and followed. And she smiled, just a little, because 3 seconds, 3 fleeting moments, had saved lives, forged courage, and built a legacy. Her legacy. And with that thought, Sergeant Ava Reynolds turned and walked back toward the barracks, ready to continue shaping the soldiers of tomorrow. The base behind her was alive, disciplined, and safe. The fire was gone. The storm had passed. And in the hearts of those she trained, the lesson of courage, discipline, and 3 seconds would never be forgotten.